Difficulty, the state or condition of being hard to deal with or understand. In video games, difficulty is a metric by which we decide how good we've gotten. But it's not just a measurement, it's also the description of the challenge. But while all difficulty is frustrating, not all of it is genuine. So how can we tell? What's the difference? What should we look for? Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx we ask the question, how do gamers distinguish good versus fake difficulty? I enjoy a good difficult game. I like having to spend the time to actually learn the controls. I like learning the conventions of the game. I like learning what the game expects of me. And I like figuring out how much room I have to experiment. When done right, difficulty enhances a game. It makes it worth playing because it makes it rewarding to complete something. Good difficulty is also an example of good design. When you play a multiplayer game against another human being, that other human being adapts to what you're doing in an attempt to beat you. A game that is genuinely difficult does the same thing. However, it doesn't do it in a manner that is unfair. When you write an AI program and you say, player does this, AI responds with this, the programmers can either be thinking of how another person might respond, or they can be thinking about how they can falsely make certain traits different. If you're playing a first-person shooter, and the artificial intelligence understands that you're doing very well, and so it implies more aggressive tactics, that's good difficulty. But if the AI responds to you being a skilled player who's racking up kills by turning the enemies into bullet sponges where they weren't before, or ramping up their speed, especially in a noticeable fashion, that's not actually improving the enemies from a tactical perspective. It's turning them into super soldiers. And I'm not saying that can't be. Now, if you were expecting super soldiers, that's fine. That's what the game is about. You're already aware of that. But if you're not expecting super soldiers, if you're playing a regular war game and suddenly it seems like all of the enemies are much faster, as if they all injected themselves with some sort of super serum just now, that seems unfair. It seems unrealistic, it's something that breaks the immersion of the game, and it feels cheap. Now, I hope you've never been in a random race with other people on a highway. It'd be odd if you randomly were engaging in street races with other cars who were traveling to the places that they wanted to go. But let's go into a bizarro world where this is more common. If you start flooring the gas, and somebody else with a worse car starts flooring the gas, indicating they're up for the race, it's max speed that is going to determine who wins that race. Now let's talk about a racing game that has implemented what we're calling fake difficulty. Suddenly max speed doesn't matter so much, just matters if you're doing good. If you're doing good, that other car suddenly thinks, oh, well, I better go faster. The actual physical attributes of the car are ignored, and to generate some sort of a challenge, the car goes faster than it technically should be able to go. Now, this can't happen in the real world. The actual mechanics of a mechanical device, a car, are restricted by real world limitations. But in a video game, those things aren't restrictive. In fact, it's easier to ignore those things. So the car just randomly goes faster. It had a top speed when you were doing less good in the game that it totally ignores, implementing a new top speed. If this happened in real life, you would be like, well, something's wrong with reality. You would perhaps search for some way to wake up. Perhaps this is a dream. The laws of physics no longer apply in the same way that they have for literally billions of years. This is why it makes sense to call it fake difficulty. It's because it takes you out of the world the game is established. It feels fake, even in the parameters of a fake world. Real difficulty takes a lot of thought. There's planning involved. A designer has to act with respect for both the player and the rules that they have established for their own virtual world. They have to care about balance and consistency. Video game designers have to think about their world like a world and adhere to the tenets that they establish as they create that world. People like to call Dark Souls punishingly difficult, and there are certainly times that it does feel like that. It does punish you for screwing up. It is indeed a hard game, but it's not falsely difficult. The game's director, Hidetaka Miyazaki, as you might expect, has been asked about it before. In fact, this is what he had to say when talking about the difficulty level in his games. "I have no intention to make the game any easier. In fact, I want it to be more difficult. The way I put it to my team is that we're trying to make the most difficult game that is possible to make, which at the same time can be conquered by those who persevere. It has to be firm, but fair. There's a contradiction there, I realize. As such, we have 5 key criteria on which the difficulty level is judged. We want any player to be able to clear any obstacles simply by learning from mistakes and paying close attention. Then the reasons for failure must always be clear and understandable. Every problem must have multiple solutions so that players can tackle it any way they want. The game's controls can never be a factor from which the difficulty is derived. And finally, we want to make sure that there's the possibility for miracles to happen. Those magical moments that spread stories outside the confines of the game world. The co-creator of Super Meat Boy, Edmund McMillan, wrote an article addressing the difficulty level in Super Meat Boy, which has a reputation as a hard game. Ultimately, he explained a philosophy that, if followed, I think probably doesn't create fake difficulty. He said this: "Video games are exercises in learning and growing. The designer acts as the teacher, giving the player problems that escalate in difficulty, hoping their course will help them learn as they go, get better, and feel good about what they achieve. When you are trying to teach someone something, you don't punish them when they make a mistake, you let them learn from it and give them positive reinforcement when they do well." He concluded this by saying, "Don't beat your children." If a designer doesn't look at a game as a learning experience, and if they don't see themselves as attempting to communicate with the player, there's a good chance they'll resort to the kinds of tricks that we were talking about earlier to make a game seem more difficult. After all, difficulty makes a game longer, and making a game longer makes it better, right? I mean, not really. When the game manipulates its own mechanics in a manner to beat you, not acting as if it's one step ahead, but acting as a skilled adversary, not breaking the game's mechanics, but rather using the game's mechanics, that's good difficulty. But if the game's AI doesn't exhibit some form of skill that slides and scale to you, that adapts to you, that understands the situation and attempts to implement an actual strategy, instead just turning the enemies into a bullet sponge or having attacks that take most of your hit points that they only use if you're doing the thing that beats them, or suddenly has much better running attributes, or for whatever reason is able to go at a higher top speed, that is fake difficulty. To put it bluntly, some games are not fair. Being extremely hard doesn't actually have an effect on how fair a game is. If the game is designed carefully, deliberately, and with respect for both the player and the world that's established, there's a good chance the difficulty isn't fake. What are some games that you think have good difficulty, and what are some that you feel have fake difficulty? Leave us a comment, we're looking forward to hearing from you. And if you like this video, please click like. If you're not subscribed, now'd be a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week, and the best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. As always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon, you can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero, and we'll see you next time, right here on gameranx.